as some comrades say, is lit, right? Lit. The revolution is lit.
We are a nation of people that's been dispersed against our will. We must be organized. There are material objectives that we have as a people.
We can't settle!
We demand reparations. We are one people. We are one Africa. We are Africans. We were Africans when we got on the ship. We are Africans when we got off the ship.
Black power matters.
We have to recognize that America is a settler colony. The police are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. All over the world, you see people rising up. The people must have power. Because we are Africans. Our power to the people. Black power to the African community. They thought they had destroyed the movement, but we are here to tell them that black is back. Black is back. Capitalism must be destroyed. Colonialism must be destroyed. The people must have power.
Uhuru, comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday Study featuring Chairman Omali Yeshitela. My name is Akile Anai, the Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for this morning. These studies are so important, and we encourage you right now to invite your friends and family to it. This week, Chairman Omali Yeshitela will introduce the political report to the second 7th Congress Plenary of the African People's Socialist Party, Chapters 2 and 3. The plenary will be taking place virtually February 6th through the 9th, where the political report is read and adopted. However, we are introducing it a week earlier due to a jam-packed agenda at the plenary itself, and we want to allow ample enough time for our movement to be able to review and study this report. If you want the guarantee of the entire political report, register for the plenary at apspplenary.org. For the first hour, Chairman will review the study materials, and in the second, we'll open it up for you, our live viewers, to ask your questions. It's my honor now to introduce our leadership, the leader of the African nation and the worldwide African Revolution, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru, Director Akile, thank you so much for the introduction. And I want to do a self-criticism to you and to all of the comrades who are accustomed to participating in this, the study that we're doing. I know many of you have already recognized just how primitive my end of this process is, and I guarantee that I'm going to take that on, and we'll get better at doing this coming up. I'm wearing a shirt now that you can't see. Unfortunately, I wore it for the purpose of being able to see it. It's a shirt with for the campaigns of T'Challa Masimba, who's running for election in St. Louis and for the 21st ward there. And he and Comrade Herdosha Kalambai Benton campaigning to win. Herdosha Kalambai is running for the 3rd ward in St. Louis. And I wanted to be able to promote that, and because I think it's important for you to understand the significance of these campaigns. I'm telling you now, you should look, and I'm asking whomever has the ability to do so to place the information in the comment section or chat section of this process now, to vote Masimba, MASIMBA.org, to vote Kalambai, KALAMBAYI.org. These are the candidates. These are your candidates. They're in St. Louis, but they're incredibly significant for moving our struggle forward. And they are running an important campaign. One, Comrade Kalambai, with the slogan, Revolutionary Times, Revolutionary Solutions. They're demanding reparations. Comrade T'Challa with the slogan, for Black is Back. And they are running against neo-colonial agents of white power in St. Louis that's stripping our people, our community of every resource, despite the desperate circumstances they've been forced to live in, just like most of us throughout out this country. St. Louis has a particular and peculiar kind of history, however, and I'm calling on everybody to go to those campaign pages. Again, vote Masimba, MASIMBA.org. I'm sorry, and vote Kalambai, KALAMBAYI.org. And offer your support, because these are our candidates, and you don't get an opportunity often to vote for an African who will fight for Black power, unabashedly, unashamedly said, yes, yes, yes. Black people, African people are colonized, and we have a responsibility to take this on. And we recognize that the election is not the solution. It simply offers us an opportunity to extend our struggle to another level, on another front. And the struggle ultimately is for Black power, for African people to have our own power, independent of the capacity of the white ruling class or any other entity to control us. So I want you to do this. I need $6,000 for these campaigns. I need something like $3,000 for each of these candidates. And so please go and check that out. Now, what I would like to do is get to the political report for our upcoming plenary. This, I'm going to be reading from the 2nd and 3rd chapters of this political report. As Comrade Director Akili has already said, that it's going to be a really packed plenary. And the plenary starts on February 6th. And it starts with the theme, African workers of the world, unite and organize. And I'm not reading the first, but because I'm going to do that on the 6th. I'll read the first, and then I'll go through other aspects of the political report. I just want to make sure that we'll be able to cover the entire political report. And that's why, in many ways, this is the beginning of the plenary process, because I'm reading this now. And it's already been stated, you can access this by following the leadership that's been offered up by Comrade Director Akili Naiba, how to get the entire political report. And everyone should read it. So this is the 2nd chapter. It speaks to the crisis of imperialism. And it's the crisis of imperialism deepens. Nearly 40 years ago, at the party's first Congress in Oakland, California in September 1981, Our main resolution or political report addressed the crisis of imperialism as it looked at that time. What is striking is that it could almost have been written for this political report to our second plenary of the 7th Congress. It sets the tone for our summation of this period. It lays out quantitatively how crisis after crisis compounds toward the point of no return, becoming qualitative transformation, the point where the uneasy equilibrium turns into destruction of colonial capitalism and victory for the colonized nations and toiling masses of the world. Here is what we wrote of the world situation 4 decades ago, and I'm quoting: "The escalating victories of the peoples over imperialism, along with the almost daily emergence of new struggles against world imperialism, are creating shockwaves and crises within the imperialist centers. The revolutionary triumphs of the people of Vietnam, Cambodia, Cuba, Nicaragua, Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, Iran, Ethiopia, and Grenada, to name a few, have caused absolute panic within imperialist circles. The fierce struggles of the peoples of El Salvador, Guatemala, Chile, Colombia, and Palestine, along with the deepening revolutionary process in Iran, have pushed imperialism to reveal a more reactionary face. The present epoch of struggles is threatening imperialism with a finality it has never faced before. The previous successful struggles against imperialism, combined with those presently occurring and incessantly emerging, are removing from imperialism's bloody grasp the near-free human and material resources which were previously extracted from the oppressed peoples with impunity. This situation has led to a shortage of some material resources, price adjustments for others, and has contributed to imperialism's urgent scramble to place a death grip on those who remain under imperialist control within the world capitalist system. Consequently, the imperialist centers are experiencing a contraction of production and escalating inflation and unemployment, which contribute to increasing political and social contradictions within the imperialist centers themselves. The shrinking resources available for theft by the imperialist powers collectively, plus the struggle by US imperialism to maintain its supremacy over world capitalism, is leading to intra-imperialist struggles as the various imperialist powers continuously belie the adage of honor among thieves by attempting to cut the throats of their imperialist competitors whenever it is to their individual advantage to do so. Consequently, although the NATO allies are keeping up a good public front, it is clear that the unity of the NATO alliance is being constantly challenged by the resistance of most members to US pressures to contribute more to their own domestic inflationary pressures by spending more for arms and war preparation. The European alliance partners also have differences among themselves concerning the US belligerent and provocative anti-Soviet posture. And the US is forever threatening all-out war with Japan, which has been more successful in exploiting US auto and electronic markets than some US domestic capitalists. In Europe, inflation, unemployment, and various political contradictions are leading to ever-widening social contradictions. There has already been a US NATO-inspired coup in Turkey, where thousands of progressive political activists have been rounded up by the military, and reports of torture and mistreatment of political prisoners abound. A similar attempted coup in Spain was only narrowly averted, and the fascist generals are obviously lurking in the background, becoming more organized and awaiting their next opportunity. That's the end of that quote. That's 40 years ago. And as I said, you can see every contradiction that's being confronted in this country, in the world, in that just those passages from the political report to our Congress, our first Congress 40 years ago. This passage from the political report to the party's first Congress 40 years ago clearly revealed the fact that imperialist crises are unrelenting, one following the other. Each apparent imperialist success in quelling the struggles of Africans and the world's peoples is eventually sometimes rapidly overturned, revealing an even deeper rupture in the colonial capitalist social system than what was previously obvious. We have continued to talk about the crisis of imperialism because crisis is built into a system whose permanence and success rely on the domination of the colonized peoples of the world. Africans everywhere are fighting to determine our own future and way of life without the unwelcome intervention of crass, craven, foreign, and alien colonialists. African people are determined to live without the unwelcome and intervention of colonialism and its spawn capitalism. A global system founded and reliant on colonialism is inherently unstable and crisis-prone due to the resistance of the colonized. This colonialism is the original sin of capitalism. It is what Karl Marx characterized as the so-called primitive accumulation of capital, the slavery pure and simple in the New World, as he said, that provided the pedestal upon which rests capitalism or wage slavery in Europe. Some Marxists speak often of the crisis of imperialism. However, they mean something entirely different from our party. In the African People's Socialist Party, we understand and teach that all capitalist activity occurs on a pedestal of the colonial domination of peoples and countries globally, and that the colonial enslavement and dispersal of Africans is key to this activity. African internationalism teaches us that capitalist or imperialist crises are not simply a matter of capitalist overproduction atop the colonial pedestal. It is the existence of the inherently unstable pedestal that foments crisis. It is the growing inability of the colonial capitalists to benefit from their parasitic station in the same old way, either because of the growing active political consciousness of those who constitute the colonial pedestal or escalation of struggle between contending predators for its control. Even ruling class pundits declare US in a permanent decline. In any event, we are not the only ones to recognize the imperialist crisis. The crisis of imperialism and the decline of white power has taken center stage in the discourse of leading thinking representatives of the ruling class. The July-August 2020 edition of the bourgeois journal Foreign Affairs is dedicated to this discussion. One submission by Alexander Cooley and Daniel H. Nexon has the revealing title, How Hegemony Ends, the Unraveling of American Power. The article acknowledges that there have been many other predictions of the end of the system, but this one is different, the article states, as it goes on to describe the symptoms of imperialist decline as it is concentrated in US white power. Says Cooley and Nexon, and this is their quote in Foreign Affairs. But this time really is different. The very forces that made US hegemony so durable before are today driving its dissolution. Three developments enable the post-Cold War US-led order. First, with the defeat of communism, the United States faced no major global ideological project that could rival its own. Second, with the disintegration of the Soviet Union and its accompanying infrastructure of institutions and partnerships, weaker states lacked significant alternatives to the United States and its Western allies when it came to securing military, economic, and political support. And third, transnational activists and movements were spreading liberal values and norms that bolstered the liberal order. Today, those same dynamics have turned against the United States. A vicious cycle that erodes US power has replaced the virtuous cycles that once reinforced it. With the rise of great powers such as China and Russia, autocratic and illiberal projects rival the US-led liberal international system. Developing countries and even many developed ones can seek alternative patrons rather than remain dependent on Western largesse and support. And illiberal, often right-wing transnational networks are pressing against the norms and pieties of the liberal international order that once seemed so implacable. In short, US global leadership is not permanent, is not simply in retreat. In short, US global leadership is not simply in retreat, It is unraveling, and the decline is not cyclical, but permanent, unquote. Yeah, the white man said it. The authors of this foreign affairs submission, however, could not possibly envision the end of the colonial capitalist system altogether, or that the lowly, despised, colonized would bring about its end. They would also be contemptuous of the idea that African internationalism is the major global ideological project actively contending with the whole system, including the neo-colonial so-called weaker states, which are themselves remnants of the past order the author recognizes as representative of US decline. Globally, many have witnessed the drama associated with the 2020 US presidential election with bemusement. However, party members armed with the science of African internationalism and an organization constantly using principles of historical materialist investigation and analysis have not been confused at all. The contradictions of a failed global system are concentrated in the US. The disabled hegemon. US disabilities are representative of a terminally afflicted colonial capitalist world socialist system. For years now, actually since the party's first Congress, and continuing on through each subsequent Congress, we have been defining and quantifying the crisis of the existing world system that was founded and is reliant on a violent parasitic stranglehold on Africa, our people, and the colonized and subject peoples of the world. The shocking election of Donald J. Trump as US president in 2016 was evidence of political crisis grown so severe that it could no longer be obscured. The political fissures within US colonialist-based society were bared to the dismay of the white colonial rulers. The 2016 presidential campaign process and election allowed white people, ordinary colonizers, to discover their common disunity with the colonial capitalist political establishment. They learned that the colonial capitalist media and other institutions were lying when they claimed their ruling class narrative mirrored white people's understanding of the world and their view of themselves. This discovery is what has given such weight to Trump's characterization of the bourgeois media as fake news that has become part of the general lexicon often used by bourgeois media themselves. Many colonial political pundits considered Trump's 2016 election a fluke. His campaign disregarded the colonial bourgeois machinery and rules that have always regulated presidential elections and vetted responsible and respectable candidates. Trump won, despite the fact that he actually did confront a rigged system. And it is rigged. It has always been rigged, and not just against Trump, but against any potential for an effective run and unscripted campaign that was disruptive to the general interests of the leading colonial capitalist bloc. It was rigged with the prescient US ruling class 1787 Constitutional Convention compromise that apportioned representatives to the Congressional House of Representatives and electoral votes according to a formula that would only count each African in the US as 3/5 of a person. This handful of bourgeois selected electoral voters superseded the popular will of the white people. The Southern colonial capitalist slaveholders were ensured an advantage, but one which colonial capitalist rulers in the North could live with. This was rigged by contending bourgeois interests, all of which would be realized at the expense of the colonially enslaved African. The US election, like all other colonial capitalist democratic elections, are nonviolent contests between contending sectors of the ruling class for control of the state. A mutual distrust among them sometimes makes it difficult for someone directly from the ruling class to succeed in capturing the US presidency. Others of the ruling class have often united to prevent an individual colonialist like Nelson Rockefeller, for example, from assuming personal control of the US imperialist state apparatus. The rulers generally campaign and run by proxy, utilizing their electoral machinery, including the ruling political parties, to collectivize and regulate the process through which they contend for control of the state. They fund the persons and parties most likely to carry out their agenda, and even supply their campaigns and cabinets with lawyer functionaries, lobbyists, bourgeois intellectuals, and other thinking representatives. The leading capitalist bloc since the 1940s in the United States and globally is what is often referred to as Atlanticist. This is the international bloc of Euro-American capitalists that came together following the Second Imperialist World War to institutionalize their collective colonial capitalist world domination. They created the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, the United Nations, UN, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, the World Bank, and an assortment of trade and treaty organizations designed initially to frustrate Soviet Russia's development and influence, prevent Germany from arising anew as a separate contender for world domination, and to keep the world's political economy from achieving a destabilizing anti-colonialist radical departure. Trump was not vetted by the ruling Atlanticist bloc because he was initially considered more as comic relief than as a real candidate. He received free publicity from ruling class media that his opponents would belatedly spend millions of dollars to acquire. Trump was also not primarily dependent on ruling class dollars to fund his campaign to the extent of his 2016 opponents. And although it appears he has far less money than he claims, he did have enough to run an effective presidential campaign at a time of massive dissatisfaction among the people, colonized and colonizer alike. Trump was free of the direction and discipline by ruling class money and the lobbyists attached to it. He was not part of the Atlanticist deal. He was therefore forced to run his campaign and define his issues in opposition to the so-called advice made available to other ruling class candidates. He was a reality show performer on his own. His obvious independence from the colonial ruling class and the fact that he was a candidate, his was a candidacy that defined itself as against the system, brought refreshing relief for much of the white colonizer population grown weary of economic decline and uncertainty and the evident increasing loss of US imperialist prestige in the world. All these things that contribute to the inherent value of whiteness. Trump's Make America Great Again slogan was clear to Africans. It was make America white again, reverse the advance of Africans and the colonized of the world. It was political reaction, reactionary, intent on restoring imperialist read white prestige by returning to total unambiguous colonial domination of the world. Bernie Sanders, flying under the banner of the ruling Democratic Party, was the other candidate that most ignited the passion of the white or colonizer population. He also tapped into the popular discontent that now roils the political terrain within the United States. While openly opposed to reparations to colonized African people, Sanders' campaign recognized the decay of the economic status of ordinary colonizers, healthcare, student loans, retirement pensions, education, the socially destabilizing wealth gap and income equality among white people, etc. However, despite the fact that the so-called progressive Sanders is compelled to call himself a socialist, the parasitic nature of the capitalist system means that, like white Trump supporters, the aspirations of Sanders supporters could only be satisfied at the expense of Africans and the colonized workers of the world. Both Trump colonizers and Sanders colonizers could only regain their status and stature within the existing system through deepening the oppressive exploitation of the colonized of the world. One inferred difference was that in the minds of some, Africans might receive collateral benefit from the so-called progressive program Sanders' white colonial socialism promised to colonizers. So today, the US colossus that has openly dominated the world as the preeminent imperialist power for more than 70 years, since the end of the Second Imperialist World War, is being exposed as the paper tiger Chinese revolutionary once derided when China was a leading force in the struggle against colonial capitalist world hegemony. During these 7 decades, the US has functioned as the center of gravity for the imperialist system. It has been the defining political and economic power. Almost every capitalist country and its colonized dependent paid tribute and, to the extent possible, modeled their economic and political systems on those of the US. This, along with the evolving economic structures, is what is now often referred to as globalization. What is increasingly clear today is that the contradictions reflecting the deep crisis of this global social system of parasitism, it's a global social system of parasitism, are concentrated in the US and represent an unraveling of colonial white power that is growing in visibility with each passing day. US power has been the glue that has held the global capitalist system together for almost a century. And with its decline in power and influence, the fissures of the entire global system are representative of the uneasy equilibrium we have defined before. The contest between the past and the future is heating up, and the African People's Socialist Party is leading the masses of the African nation and working class in pursuit of the future of socialist African liberation and unification. This is the future of the victorious proletariat of the world in our glorious march to the classless society known as communism. The generation-long US bloody and hopeless colonial occupation and war against the people of Afghanistan, the reemergence of Russia as a major force in international politics, the emergence of China as the preeminent global power, likely eclipsing the US and the white colonial world, contribute to profound demoralization of a sizable sector of the US and European populations, combined with the open defiance by much of the world to the continued parasitic relationship the US and Europe have imposed on them. It was almost unbearable to white US colonizers that lowly Iranians, Syrians, Iraqis, Palestinians, along with Venezuelans and people from throughout the Americas and Africa, would openly flout US white power with impunity. Here is how the notorious Francis Fukuyama describes the crisis in a December 15, 2020 submission to the Wall Street Journal. Quote, this is Fukuyama. The American failure to observe the rules and norms of its own democracy has constituted a big blow to democracy worldwide. Russia, which actually does stage rigged elections, has been chortling over Trump's accusation against the American system, while authoritarian rulers around the world have imitated Mr. Trump in dismissing critical media as purveyors of fake news. The COVID epidemic, by accelerating the pre-existing shift in the global economy's center of gravity away from North America and Europe toward Asia, has diminished America's relative weight in geopolitics, unquote. It should not be necessary to remind our comrades that this is the same Fukuyama who declared the end of history after the Soviet Union collapsed, since in his mind, the US liberal bourgeois system represented the apex of human possibilities. Obviously, he's had to eat his words since that time, and even much of the revealing above quoted Wall Street Journal article includes his undiminished, obscenely obsolete worldview. The uneasy equilibrium is tipping on the side of the oppressed. Indeed, the second plenary of the 7th Congress of our party is convening at a time of extreme intensive crisis for the colonial capitalist system that has grown to ensnare all the world since Portugal initiated the transatlantic trade of our people. This was the genesis of crisis within the crisis-ridden capitalist system. The following excerpt from the political report to the 2020 plenary will correctly describe the worsened crisis of imperialism that continues to contextualize our revolutionary work. It represents an example of the urgency associated with our plenary theme and the class-based confusion of Fukuyama and other thinking representative of colonial capitalism. We're quoting here now from the political report to our 2020 plenary. And we go. Imperialism is experiencing obvious disarray. The international bourgeoisie is split in 1,000 different ways. Raging wars and threats of war continue unabated. Traditional bourgeois alliances are under severe stress due to growing competition between parasitic international thieves for shrinking access to the colonial resources. They are fighting over resources violently extracted at the expense of our lives and freedoms and totally necessary for the continued success of the global capitalist system. The economic configuration of the world is undergoing transformation at this very moment. Trade wars between China and the US, the Brexit crisis that has paralyzed England politically and disrupted strategic assumptions of capitalist development in Europe and the world, the growing split between the wealthy North and poor South threatening the future of Spain, the disruptive emergence of an energized, if economically challenged Russia contesting US hegemony in the Middle East and upsetting the balance of forces in Europe and elsewhere. The audacious China that sometimes align with Russia is increasingly willing to openly contend with the US. These are just a few of the examples of an imperialism experiencing existential crisis. There are others. Korea, Iran, Iraq, Yemen, Afghanistan, most of the Americas. Uninformed and poorly led battles are raging across the African continent. This is complicated by the contest for economic and political advantage between China, the US, and former European colonizers. This is a contest that does not have yet the advantage of a fully developed, coherent African internationalist informed and organized effort by Africans to conquer power in our own name and in our own interests. The US is the headquarters of a dying imperialism as we have known it for the past 70 years at least. It is the center of the storm wreaking havoc with imperialist unity internationally, in part because of domestic imperialist disunity. A naked battle is going on between the Trump regime and other sectors of the bourgeoisie, sometimes within his own regime. Trump's election failed to resolve the generally nonviolent battle for control of the state, which bourgeois elections are designed to do. This is the context we have characterized as an uneasy equilibrium. The task of our party is to tip the scales of history to the advantage of the oppressed, to the advantage of the future. Our job is to negate the system of colonial capitalism by replacing it with a system of socialism resting on a foundation of a totally liberated and united African continent. Our Africa must be led by the forcibly dispersed African nation under the leadership of the advanced attachment of the African working class, whose very existence has been preparation for this task. Comrades, this is the context within which we must examine both our readiness and unity to achieve the aims demanded of us at this moment. That's the end of the quote. And so we say, this is the context for our African internationalist analysis of the deepening crisis of imperialism unfolding before our eyes, minute by minute. So even before his election as US president in 2016, Donald Trump had already begun to sully the pristine reputation of the US presidential electoral process. He won the affection of millions of US settler colonialist voters during campaign debates by exposing his opponents as paid puppets of the rich, confessing that he had paid some himself. However, what Trump's election did not accomplish was the capture of control of the colonialist state. The bureaucracy and arms of coercion, such as the military, intelligence, police, prison, and so-called criminal justice system. This meant that the electoral process failed to resolve this critical issue necessary for stable rule. The dominant sector of the colonial capitalist ruling class, having ruled the world for the last 70 years, immediately initiated war against Trump's administration in almost every way. The legitimacy of his election was challenged with the incessant claim that Russian intervention stole the election from Hillary Clinton, a proven terrorist and efficient representatives of traditional bourgeois rule. Members of his administration were, quote unquote, exposed, sometimes jailed, and otherwise discredited. In other words, Trump suffered the same process of defamation and discrediting that he is claimed to have used in disputing Biden's 2020 election. During the 2020 election campaign and after his defeat at the polls, Trump began to declare that the election was fraudulent, rigged. This was unprecedented. The president of the US avowing that the presidential election was phony. For a while after his election defeat, Trump promoted the rumor that he might not voluntarily leave the White House upon legal completion of his term. The president of the US was saying that the US electoral process, the primary feature of US democracy that is historically held over the heads of colonized countries the world over, is a sham. This was a major indictment of US representative legitimacy, especially coming from the US president. The turnout for the 2020 presidential election was the highest in over 100 years. More than 65% of registered voters in the US participated in the highly polarized presidential election. Donald Trump received the second highest vote of any presidential candidate in US history, second only to Biden, who was credited with 80 million or more votes, and got the highest numbers of votes in US history. The fact that Trump received an estimated 57% of the white colonizer vote, similar to his 2016 tally, speaks volumes about how the crisis of imperialism is articulating itself domestically within the US, and contributing to the crisis is the fact that many Africans experience the white colonizer vote for Trump as a vote against Africans. At least half the people in the US, mostly white, mostly colonizers, are now convinced that the election was stolen from Trump and from them. Their passionate conviction was on display for days during and after the election in protest demonstrations in a number of states. Post-election pro-Trump protests resulted in at least one person being shot and several others stabbed, even before January 6th. Even so, this was not as bad as was predicted by political prognosticators and some intelligence agencies. All hell broke out in the US Capitol on January 6th, the day the US Congress was to certify the election of Biden. Thousands of white people responded to Trump's call to come to Washington, D.C. and to lead the people in the fight for the future of the US against Biden's congressional certification, and fight they did, successfully breaching the security pretensions and actually taking the Capitol. Pictures of mobs desecrating the presumptuous bastion of US authority and democracy resemble those seen in the aftermath of US-initiated coups against other countries. Demonstrably, the democratic masses were involved in overturning furniture, decor, and reigning despotism, perched, feet up, at the desk of illegitimate thugs in power. How this happened is one of the issues that must be resolved by the ruling class in a manner that masks the depth of the crisis. The ruling class is trying to convince the world that the crisis is contained, while still struggling to contain the wrath of the US white settler population. Trump's claims of a soft coup against his regime and the general belief within the ruling Republican Party and the white colonial population that it is true, and the surfacing of armed, organized white nationalist colonialists who genuinely believe that Trump's electoral defeat marks the end of Western or white civilization, promise a rocky road ahead for Biden the president-elect and for US political stability altogether. The unprecedented declaration by the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the heads of all US military forces, that the military stands with the election of Biden and is intolerant of riots was obviously necessary to calm the fears of US government leaders, especially those in Congress whose fearfulness was palpable in every breathless interview given following the attacks on the Capitol. But it was also necessary to assure the peoples and governments of the world that the US government was secure, while at the same time publicly reinforcing the justification for neutralizing Trump as the leader of the attack on the Capitol. On January 13, 1 week after the attack on the Capitol, the US House of Representatives initiated impeachment proceedings against Trump for the first time in US history that a US president has been impeached twice. Trump troop deployment has also been beefed up at the state capitol with the promise of, it says 20,000, but it's actually 25,000 troops by Biden's January 20th inauguration. The significance of this deployment, which is really understated, because when you count the 25,000 troops that they admitted and include in that the FBI, the CIA, the Homeland Security forces, the local police forces from Washington, D.C. and Capitol, there were a lot of troops there for that inauguration. And the significance of this deployment is helped by recognizing that this number is up to 4 times, actually more than 5 times greater than the number of US troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. War on the home front, crisis on steroids, even after the traditional methods of determining the victor in US presidential elections, which declared Joe Biden, Trump's opponent from the ruling Democratic Party, US president-elect. Trump and many others refused to accept the decision. Scores of lawsuits were filed by Trump to have results thrown out that did not favor his reelection. Officials from Trump's Republican Party who had the temerity to defend the legitimacy of the system faced the public wrath of Trump, and at least one was fired from his administration. Up to this day, Trump has refused to abide by the long-standing tradition of losing candidacy concessions as one of the means to support stability and confidence in the notion of US peaceful transfer of power from one capitalist representative to another. Whatever. What we must keep in mind is the truth that the attack by US colonizers on the colonial government is an attack on a government that is always attacking the domestically colonized African population. Colonialism, by definition, is violent, and it does not matter whether colonizer is liberal or conservative, right-wing or otherwise. It is colonialism, the domination of our people for economic gain and political advantage by a foreign and alien power. Our party's response to the perennial clamor about the need to turn the struggle of African people into one against fascism was addressed in Vanguard, the political report to the 7th Congress in 2018. Here's some of what we had to say then that continues to hold true. Whites fear fascism while ignoring everyday terror of colonialism. There are some liberals who would have us engage in an unrelenting fight against fascism that they see as in the utterings and actions of Trump. However, we never forget that, this is the quote from 2018 political report. However, we never forget that we are colonized and that democratic colonialism is still colonialism. The fascism feared by whites and liberals look very much like the colonialism Africans have experienced in this country for centuries. Europeans are accustomed to the experience of bourgeois democracy, which hides the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. For colonized people, the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie is raw and obvious all the time, through the violence of the state and the general white population, as well as the arbitrary denial of the civil and democratic rights of the colonized. What Europeans call fascism is the point when the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie experienced all the time by Africans and other colonized people challenges the veneer of bourgeois democracy enjoyed by white people. The liberals would have us turn our backs on the liberation of our people and the colonized peoples of the world to come to the rescue of liberal democratic colonialism. The struggle against fascism serves a sector of the white ruling class and colonial society, but for African people, it only maintains our self-defeating fight to make white people like us and to stop the police from killing and imprisoning us. The struggle against fascism is in many ways similar to the fight against racism in that it is a struggle to find a safe place within colonialism. It is a struggle that protects the colonial capitalist relationship that we have with imperialist white power. It is a struggle that unites us with one sector of colonial power against another and does absolutely nothing to destroy colonialism. This is reminiscent of now deceased activist and poet Amiri Baraka when he expressed concern in 2008 that African and or so-called left refusal to support Obama's election would open the door to fascism in a way similar to the rise of Hitler in Germany during the 1930s. First of all, many Africans have recognized over the years that what happened to European Jews at the hands of Nazi Germany follows on the heels of an accepted, normalized practice of genocide against African, indigenous, Arab, and Asian people for hundreds of years by Europeans in the process of imposing slavery and colonialism on the majority of humanity, the process of building parasitic capitalism. The tendency to compare our situation with fascism in Nazi Germany and elsewhere is erroneous and outrageous when considering the murder, terror, torture, and exploitation that Africans have endured at the hands of our white democratic colonizer for the past 600 years. It is worth noting that with all the terror and brutalities Africans have faced since our introduction to European democracy, it took the emergence of Mussolini and Hitler and the attack on the rights of white people for a special designation called fascism to suddenly become necessary. Then proto-fascist repression did appear in the US in the 1950s in what is called the McCarthy era, with a reign of terror backed by popular support from the general white population chasing the Communist Party underground and almost into extinction. It was the colonized African population whose struggle for democracy kept the society open. Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, Rosa Parks, and an army of Africans living near starvation and suffering every imaginable deprivation were the forces that not only defeated US fascism, but forged new definitions of democracy into the agenda of the US. Africans would still be on plantations buck dancing for a slimy, non-fascist, democratic, white nationalist social system, and every white person who so demanded had those aforementioned Africans tremble from the fear of fascism. The designer character of the term is even more obvious when we search for a definition of fascism. While there are many, including some identified as scientific or Marxist, it is clear that there is not a satisfactory a priori definition. Fascism has become a pejorative, something that defines some traits of the phenomena once it appears, but fascism isn't capable of being defined scientifically in a way that would help us to know it before it arrives. It is notable that the ubiquitous murder, imprisonment, and police containment of the African population is never defined as fascism. These conditions are seen by the white population as normal. It is only when the features of the normal existence of the colonized begin to intrude on the existence of white or the so-called larger society, the term fascism comes into play. At that point, the colonized are called on to choose between fascist colonialism and non-fascist democratic colonialism. Amilcar Cabral, a leader of the revolutionary movement to defeat Portuguese colonialism in Guinea-Bissau, West Africa, stated in a response to a Portuguese leftist position that the defeat of fascism inside of Portugal, something the Portuguese left saw as primary to their interests, would come with the defeat of colonialism. Led by African liberation movements in Portuguese colonies. That, here's Cabral. We must reaffirm clearly that while being opposed to all fascism, our people are not fighting Portuguese fascism. We're fighting Portuguese colonialism. The destruction of fascism in Portugal must be the work of the Portuguese people themselves. The destruction of Portuguese colonialism will be the work of our people, while the fall of fascism in Portugal might not lead to the end of Portuguese colonialism, and this hypothesis has been put forward by some Portuguese opposition leaders. We are certain that the elimination of Portuguese colonialism will bring about the destruction of Portuguese fascism. Through our liberation struggle, we are making an effective contribution toward the defeat of Portuguese fascism and giving the Portuguese people the best possible proof of our solidarity. This factor is a cause of pride to our people who hope for the same solidarity from the Portuguese people. And like Africans in what was then Portuguese Africa, Africans in the US and around the world are also fighting against colonialism. This is something that Baraka and the anti-fascist alarmists have not understood. The concern expressed about fascism is one that would keep the struggle for our liberation locked into a fight against fascism by supporting one or another of the non-fascist ruling class parties or personalities. The fight against fascism is a fight to maintain the capitalist imperialist status quo, unquote. That's from the Political Report 2018 to our Congress. I'm going to keep reading, Comrade Akile. Ultimately, fascism is a form of the state, of the capitalist state, in the same way that democracy is a form of the state. Both forms of the capitalist state, like capitalism itself, requires colonialism for their survival and well-being. When we say this, there are some who accuse the party of being insensitive to the threat of fascism, to the threat that fascism presents to democracy. No, such is not the case at all. We do recognize that when the colonial capitalist system is under severe stress, it is capable of making major assaults on the democratic rights of its citizens. I said its citizens. We are colonized, we are colonial subjects, not citizens. However, colonialism is a major assault on the democratic rights of the colonized all the time, not just during times of stress. Nevertheless, the assault on the democratic rights of our people, of the colonized, is never characterized as fascism. This understanding is related to our recognition that when Marx talks about primitive accumulation, he does so only as it relates to the development of Europe. Primitive accumulation is the means by which Marx objectified the rest of us and kept the activity of looting, rape, pillage of colonialism as representatives of the development of human society. When we talk about what happened to African people, we are talking about something quite different. The start up of capitalism and Europe development is more than what Marx called primitive accumulation. Colonialism became the mode of production that gave birth to capitalism and sustains it today. When you look at the origin of the system, its essential nature is not phenomenally different from when it expresses itself in the form called fascism. When fascism arises, white people are experiencing features of what capitalism is and what it was when it was forged through the colonial project. Democracy is the ability of the capitalist class to obscure and cloak from white people's sight the anti-democratic violence that gave rise to its prominence. Let me say this again. Democracy is the ability of the capitalist class to obscure and cloak from white people's sight the anti-democratic violence that gave rise to its prominence. Bourgeois democracy is colonial democracy by another name. The real problem with fascism for many white people is when features of colonialism represent a perceived threat to sectors of the colonizer population. The definitive reference to this threat is the Jewish experience in Europe and especially in Germany. It is only an aberration for the colonizers when they experience a glimpse of the system as it is experienced by the colonized majority population of the world. It is this lack of clarity that allows many, especially Marxists, to describe the ruthless exploitation of Africa and other colonized peoples as super profits, quote, when in reality, these are not super profits, but they are the normal profits of capitalism not experienced by the colonizers who indeed have a super relationship to capitalist exploitation. It's not super, that's the way it works. It doesn't work that way for white people because they are part of a minority population of colonial settlers who benefit from the colonial system. When white people fight against fascism, they are fighting for continued colonial domination and competition between sectors of the colonizer for control of our stolen resources. You can see this flaw in the concept of primitive accumulation. The question of fascism is not about Africans and the colonizers, it's about Europe and Europeans. The colonial violence experienced by African people has never been a factor in the worldview of the colonizers. Where we are now is a new place historically, unleashing the colonial peoples of the world and overturning the whole damn colonial narrative. As we quoted from the article by Cooley and Nixon earlier, the crisis is not cyclical, it is permanent. We have reached the extremity of US decline as the defining colonial capitalist power in the world. The class and national polarization revealed in the 2016 US presidential election have always been present. The US success in murdering, slandering, and imprisoning millions of African people, along with other aspects of counterinsurgency that assassinated and imprisoned our leaders, pumped debilitating drugs into our community as a life and morale destroying economic vacuum, sucking billions of dollars from our colonized community to be pumped into the bellies, fridges, and bank accounts of the colonizers, cloak the true nature of the system to the world, including the colonizers and the colonized. Now the proverbial chickens have come home to roost, and the built-in contradictions of a world and worldview resting on a foundation of colonial capitalist oppression are proving more devastating than the improvised explosive devices or IEDs that bedevil US military colonial occupiers in the Middle East. The crisis of the colonial capitalist system represents the rot and decay of global parasitism, and it is explosive inside the US. The lives of ordinary colonizers, just plain white folks, will never be the same again. Economic crisis will continue essentially unabated. The anti-colonial work of our party is only one of the factors that guarantees this. Peoples the world over must, as a condition for continued existence, fight to regain control of our ability to produce life for ourselves, whether in Afghanistan, Venezuela, North St. Louis, Missouri, in the US, in all of the Americas, including indigenous peoples, and on the entire continent of Africa, and wherever we are located, the African nation is being made increasingly aware of the relationship of our forced dispersal and the conditions in which we find ourselves wherever we are located. These contradictions are the basis of the inevitability of unending struggle. They are the basis of the current uneasy equilibrium that is tilting every day in favor of the future, in favor of the destruction of the colonial capitalist social system, the liberation and unification of Africa, and the advent of socialism on a global scale. The global contest between the colonized and the colonizer is sharpening within the US. Millions of white people, colonizers, are politically mobilized around a naked, non-pretentious, uncamouflaged, pro-colonialist worldview. It is a worldview that has its basis in an objective relationship that exists between the colonizers, whose well-being and future are predicated on the merciless deprivation of life and well-being of Africans. They want to make this clear. We talk now, we say the global contest between the colonized and the colonizers is sharpening within the US. Millions of white people, colonizers, are politically mobilized around a naked, non-pretentious, uncamouflaged, pro-colonialist worldview. It is a worldview that has its basis in an objective relationship that exists between the colonizers, whose well-being and future are predicated on the merciless deprivation of life and well-being for Africans. So it's not some crazy white people just don't like black people, that kind of nonsense, that kind of dribble that's pumped into our communities through preachers and through jive politicians and papers and movies and things like that. It's an objective, it is an objective relationship where the well-being, generally speaking, of the colonizer requires the suppression of the rights and resources, the theft of them, of those who are colonized. The contradictions of US white settler colonialism have also been thrust to the surface by the permanent fight of the indigenous people against ongoing encroachment on the paltry land and other resources left by settler colonialism under their nominal authority. The ludicrous fight over so-called immigration rights is also connected to land theft of over half of Mexico and neo-colonial and other imperialist policies and relationships being contested throughout the Americas. Many colonized Mexicans correctly proclaim, we didn't cross the border crossed us. The strategic location of domestically colonized Africans in the US has been a powerful impetus for the crisis of imperialism that is being experienced by ordinary colonizers, especially from lowly so-called middle class citizens of the settler colonial state. 6 years after the seminal August 9th, 2014 uprising of Africans in Ferguson, St. Louis, Missouri, the May 25th, 2020 African rebellion sparked by the brutal murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota, unleashed protests and uprising unprecedented in US history, pushing people of all nationalities in the US to spontaneous open opposition to US domestic policies and traditions. The reawakening of the African giant that had previously been beaten and jailed into a presumed state of unorganized stupor has shattered the facade of social peace that has enveloped US society since the general defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s. Comrades, it is our party that has successfully assumed responsibility at the helm of this reawakened movement. It is we who represent the will and direction of the struggle of African workers of the world to unite and organize for the long overdue conquest of power and unification that is called for by this plenary. We must win. We are winning. And then Comrade Akile, I'm gonna move just a bit further. So we say we are everywhere. African people and our vanguard party. African internationalism is a theory of practice requiring active intervention in life. The cumulative activity of the party globally is having a profound effect on our struggle for the liberation and unification of African people under the leadership of the party, the advanced detachment of our colonized nation and brutally oppressed indefatigable working class. The solidity of the African nation is being won and led through the political work of our party globally. This is actively exacerbating the instability, general crisis, and decline of the colonial capitalist social system. Africa was crucial to the emergence of the colonial capitalist system and is necessary for its ongoing capacity. While more and more predators are being drawn into the life-extracting economic fray, fighting to continue bleeding the colonized, the growing influence of the African People's Socialist Party continues to deepen the imperialist crisis. Clearly, we are winning. The African Socialist International is on the ground in Africa. The work of Secretary General Louise Kinshasa is rapidly pushing this process forward. After many years of struggles and ups and downs, it is impossible to say too much about the steady and patient leadership that Comrade Louise has provided for the development of the ASI, African Socialist International, with work throughout Europe and on the continent of Africa itself. The significance of our foothold in occupied Tanzania, or South Africa as it is known by its colonial name, cannot be exaggerated. Ruling class media do not report on our work because they created the conventional perception that all events will be measured by the electoral process established by the white colonizers. For them, like most global observers, it is the sometimes militant activism that flares up within the neo-colonial capitalist state electoral system that is the critical determinant factor. Our party has always recognized that African people organized under the independent leadership of the advanced detachment of the working class will decide the future of our people and nation, not the neo-colonial capitalist democratic electoral system. This distinguishes our party from the first president of independent Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah. who made an error in assuming that the liberation and unification of Africa and our nation could be achieved by agreement between neo-colonial heads of state whose economic and political relevance depended on upholding the colonial capitalist social system. This is why we are African internationalists and not Pan-Africanists. We recognize that our Africa will be liberated and united through the informed, independent expression of our collective will by the masses of African people under the revolutionary leadership of our party. It is the only way. Our work in occupied Tanzania, therefore, has added significance because it is the launch pad of our regional work on the entire African continent. Our party has had a presence on the African continent for a long time. Among other places, we have done organizing work in Sierra Leone, Ghana, Kenya, Namibia, and in South Africa, going back many years. However, it has been in the most recent period that we have established the party and our unadulterated African internationalist worldview on the ground with the presence of the African People's Socialist Party occupied Tanzania. We are in the townships, out of the view of most ruling class and liberal media. Our party is in various townships through our mass organizations. We are spreading advanced revolutionary theory among the most dispossessed sectors of the African population. NPDM, ANWO, and APDEP are all there, existing and organizing with varying degrees of efficacy and stability. We are there among the masses of our people who our theory teaches us are central to making the revolutionary struggle for power in the hands of the African working class. We are not to be confused with trade unionism, which at best limits the struggle of the workers to accomplish better deals at the point of production. Never mind the fact that the so-called point of production is located on the pedestal of African colonialism and requires the extraction of our human and material resources for its success. In contrast, African internationalism educates and organizing the African working class to take power, to become the new ruling class, which is the definition of socialism properly understood. In addition, an additional value of our party's work in occupied Tanzania is the role delegated to our South African Party chairman, Tafari Mugere, to build and lead the party's work throughout Africa where our presence is rapidly expanding. Sometimes this results in the creation of party members and organizations in various locations. Sometimes we have only held members for a short period of time, but in every instance, the method of our recruitment process has resulted in sowing the fertile seeds of African internationalism and in introducing to the consciousness of Africans everywhere that our party is here. We are now in Chad, Nigeria, Mali, Uganda, Tanzania, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Sierra Leone, South Africa, and other places with greater or lesser degrees of effectiveness. The magnitude of the party's organized presence in occupied Tanzania is expressed in its successful function as the hub for our African work. The work we do in Africa now has the benefit of an on-the-ground organization and a leadership that assumes responsibility for its success. The formal declaration of our party to build the African Socialist International occurred 40 years ago at the first Congress of the African People's Socialist Party in September 1981. This was the bold move that helped to separate the party from Pan-African and other pro-independence organizations within the US and globally. The political and ideological struggle surrounding our ASI work was part of the process of forging the party as the advanced detachment, the custodian of the international African liberation movement. This was also part of the process of fighting to provide a revolutionary theory for the struggle of our people. It represented the understanding of the party that philosophical coherence and ideological clarity were urgently necessary to liberate Africa and our people globally. It is this process of ideological and political struggle that continues to be essential for our national liberation and the advent of the socialist world led by the workers in arms. Our ASI work gives a concrete reality to our African internationalist theory and is the only reason it is possible to speak of an African liberation movement as distinct from the inherently opportunistic work of the Pan-Africanists and others. Initially, we scoured the earth looking for African revolutionary organizations that would join with us to create the ASI. Through the years, we were forced to conclude that our regular organizing trips through Europe and Africa were going up against the dregs of international African opportunism. We saw that we, the African People's Socialist Party, would have to assume full responsibility for building the revolutionary party of the African working class globally, or as Marcus Garvey might have said, universally. One contradiction we have encountered throughout all our revolutionary work is so obvious that we have given too little attention to it. That contradiction rests in theory. We have always struggled against an underlying presumption of social reality with no actual real foundation in life. The fact is that Africa and Africans are the primary basis for the existing social system. We're not just pitiful people who are horribly treated in society. We are the very foundation of the society that we criticize. Capitalism has its origin in colonial slavery. The comparative genius attributed to Europe or the civilized or superior white man is a fallacy, an assumption born of colonial slavery. The prevailing global assumption of white supremacy, as it's called, though not always expressed directly, stems logically from a global superstructure of ideas and legal systems originating from the global capitalist economic base of society formed on colonialism. As African internationalists, we are absolutely confident that Africa and Africans are key to the destruction of the capitalist parasite. There is no shortcut. African revolution under the leadership of the African working class is the way forward. This is the revolution that is struggling for expression everywhere Africans are located in the world, notwithstanding their consciousness of this fact. Our party is the only vehicle for forging an international African consciousness and the revolutionary organization to provide this consciousness in concrete form. This is African internationalism and the African Socialist International. Only we are doing this. This is why we always mean something different than other Black militants or left-wing colonizers when addressing the issue of Africa and African people, the colonized of the world and the world of colonizers. Let's say, this is why we always mean something different than Black militants and left-wing colonizers when addressing the issues of Africa and African people, the colonized of the world and the world of colonizers. Our first formal initiative to build the ASI occurred on November 15, 1982. The day following our historic first World Tribunal on reparations for African people in the US. Among others present were representatives from Barbados, Senegal, Congo, and South Africa. For a while, there was some limited work by the various forces committed to building the ASI. For example, we were alerted to the pending October 25, 1983 US invasion of Grenada by comrades in Barbados, one of the US staging grounds. But it would be some years later that the party would solidify the ASI organization. There continues to be some hiccups in this work to build the party internationally. Africans from a number of countries in Europe and Africa have been in and out of the process, but we do have a process. Like the other fronts of our party work, the ASI is committed to implementing the regional strategy that will continue to build our party globally. This will provide, for the first time in history, revolutionary cadre organized in a single organization, establishing the advanced detachment on the several continents where Africans are located. We are the whirlwind that Garvey predicted would represent his ideological, political, and organizational presence following his US imprisonment and 1927 banishment by deportation to Jamaica, the island of his birth. We are 21st century Garveyites who have the benefit of the lessons provided by his work and experience. My political report at the party's 2017 plenary helps inform our understanding of the significance of the ASI as a concrete expression of African internationalism. It is critical that we review this extensive excerpt, keeping in mind that African internationalism is a theory of practice, a theory with a plan. And this is from the excerpt, again, from the 2017 political report to the plenary. And I'm quoting, "The demand by African people for national liberation is the demand that recognizes the fact that we are colonized, that the African nation as a whole lives under foreign domination. We have been waging this concerted struggle for 600 years. since the Portuguese invasion that initiated the capture and enslavement of African people in 1415. Because the African nation has been forcibly dispersed throughout the world, the struggle for national liberation has naturally traveled with us as part of the process that gave rise to the capitalist system as a worldwide system. The concentrated, self-conscious struggle for African national liberation reached its apex under the leadership of Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Associations and African Communities League in the first quarter of the 20th century, informed by the slogan, Africa for Africans at home and abroad. Since that time, after many setbacks, serious class-based battles within the African community, and the establishment of neocolonialism as a generalized condition for African people, we are forced to look beyond national liberation to the question of the kind of society we are fighting for, and to identify the social forces necessary to achieve it. Africans, a once free people existing within our own independent economies in Africa, have been transformed into commodities, first capital, and producers of capital, first workers, within a social system defined by the relationship between capitalist production and producers, resting on a foundation of slavery and colonial domination of peoples and territories. National liberation serves the purpose of freeing Africans from direct foreign domination. However, direct foreign domination is not necessary for vicious, life-draining economic exploitation, either by foreign or domestic capital. National liberation under the leadership of the African petty bourgeoisie leaves in place a system of exploitation. African toilers, producers, continue to be exploited under the aegis of a domestic flag, which may even be, as in Libya, a red, black, and green flag. To be victorious, our revolution must take place under the leadership of the African working class. This is the role of the African People's Socialist Party, the advanced detachment, the general staff of the African working class. Only the African working class, aligned with other toilers, especially the poor peasants, has a stake in destroying the entire system of exploitation and all of its attendant structures, including the artificial borders that exploit Africa, but function as the incubator for the reproduction of the neo-colonial petty bourgeois class as a social force. Only the African working class is compelled to fight for the destruction of class society and the exploitation that produced it. Under the independent revolutionary leadership of the African working class, organized under African internationalist principles, victory will mean the defeat of foreign imperialists and their domestic minions. It will mean that the toilers, the workers, and poor peasants in particular will become the new temporary ruling class, the custodians of the means of production now owned and controlled by capitalists, mostly foreign. Liberation under the leadership of African internationalists informed workers organized in the African People's Socialist Party will mean the end of economic exploitation. And once the imperialists and African petty bourgeois neo-colonialists have been crushed, the end of all exploitation. This means that African women who will play a fundamental role in the liberation of our Africa will rise to full stature with all the rights and authority this infers. This means a major assault will be made on all restrictions on the rights of women that hide under the flimsy and, in most cases, false mask of tradition. Nor will African liberation under the leadership of the African working class tolerate social, economic, and political oppression of sectors of the African nation and working class because of spurious bourgeois morality. We condemn the morality and relations that permit Europeans, white people, imperialist corporations, countries, and neo-colonial thugs to exploit our people's lives and resources in Africa and to flaunt laws protecting sovereignty, the environment, and custom with impunity, while attacking African people and the working class based on sexual orientation or relations between same gender loving individuals. The liberated African worker state will only oppress the imperialists and the neo-colonialists who have surrendered Africa's future to them. We will call on the entire African working class and all African patriots to rise up against all who would divide the nation and the working class based on the false contradictions of sexual identity, ethnic identity, and regional and religious differences. The African Revolution that liberates and unites African people under African internationalism The organized, conscious, and victorious leadership of the African working class will be the death knell of imperialist white power and capitalism as a world economy. It will finally allow for the African workers to take social possession of the means of production. Our victory will mean the entire process of production, mining, building, manufacturing, shipping, distribution, etc., will occur through workers' councils throughout the production process. This will guarantee safety and creativity throughout. Workers will not approve going into mines that are unsafe, and improvement of the productive process will not be motivated by profit that has no regard for safety and proficiency otherwise, but by the needs and aspirations of workers as producers and consumers. Additionally, because the state of the African economy smothered by the whims and requirements of imperialist white power has minimal industrial development, much of the lackluster economic life is centered in the countryside. The African Internationalist Revolution will be the first major step in the world in resolving the contradiction between the city and countryside. The full, rapid development of Africa will require it. We will have to reorganize the African economy, destroying all borders into a full-fledged anti-colonial economy. Today's economic activity in Africa is tied to the interests of foreign imperialist exploiters. Every bit of food, grown or not grown, every factory, every decision to develop a diamond, gold, iron, or bauxite mine instead of production that satisfies our needs is imperialist driven. It has been the imperialist driven economy that has forced so many African men, women, and children from the artificially created cruel conditions of the countryside into unsanitary, uncrowded, cultural crushing cities. The African working class, as the transitory ruling class, will organize production based on the real needs of the people rather than the contrived profit-driven and profit-motivated needs of the capitalists. Collective housing, neighborhood councils with the power to solve domestic problems, efficient public transportation, African educational system, literacy eradication campaigns, eradication campaigns, centers for music, cultural development and socializing, birthing programs, and socialist care for our elderly, time and centers for reflection, revolutionary rehabilitation programs, barefoot doctors deployed into the communities as in China and as in Cuba. Places where lovers can go for privacy will become ordinary features of life, overturning the horrible day-to-day grind that characterizes our reality today. Even the form of the family will be reorganized under the dictatorship of the African working class. It will allow adults to enter into agreements of relationship that are free from economic compulsion. Women will be assured economic independence, so financial duress will not be a factor that determines their commitment to a relationship nor enslaves their emotions. The immediate role of the African worker state will be to function as a protector of society against incestuous, exploitative, and oppressive relationships and their consequences. African men and women can determine whatever arrangement they contract among themselves with the state functioning as an arbiter only until the time when the rule of habit and tradition overturns the rule of the state that becomes unnecessary in human affairs. Our party also has a deep commitment to the well-being of our African children, recognizing that under the system of parasitic capitalism, our children live with daily trauma. They are demeaned, locked up, and gunned down by colonial police and tormented in the white school system. The APSP follows in the footsteps of the African Revolution of Haiti, whose victory in 1804 produced a progressive constitution that for the first time in history abolished all notion of an illegitimate child and pledged a commitment to the nurturing and protection of every child. The African adage declaring the role of the village in raising a child will be given new life. Women will be freed from the burden as isolated individual primary caregivers. The family now becomes a society in a relationship that has the force of law and collective resources of the people that have been liberated from their role as surplus under private ownership with the capitalist system. This means the institution of state-funded and administered nurseries and the child care collectives that benefit parents and children in a manner that could never happen under colonial capitalist society, developed through the commodification of African parents and children. Parents and the community at large will be able to engage in a stress-free, non-competitive relationship with our children. The African internationalist liberation and unification of Africa and Africans worldwide will be a major blow to destroy the entire capitalist system that was an outgrowth of colonialism. It will be the fundamental instrument in the emergence of world socialism, providing the defining direction for the world economy. The achievement of African international socialism will be the essential force in the achievement of permanent world peace, easily understood when it is recognized that most wars are fought by states contending with each other and with peoples for profit generation, generating markets and resources. We will replace capitalist competition with socialist cooperation, something not possible before now. Le Duan was Secretary General of the Communist Party of Vietnam with the responsibility of delivering the political report to their fourth Congress in late December of 1976. In this political report, Le Duan spoke of the possibilities of the socialist workers' state after the conquest of national liberation. Now, quoting Le Duan, that our motherland has recovered complete independence, national independence and socialism have become one. Le Duan continued, only under socialism can the age-old dream of the working people come true, i.e. liberation from oppression, exploitation, poverty, and backwardsness, a life in plenty with an assured tomorrow, a civilized and happy life. Only socialism can bring to the working people the full right to master and restore genuine human dignity to man, enabling him to be the real master of society, of nature, and of himself. Under socialism, our motherland will have a modern economy, advanced culture and science, strong national defense, thereby ensuring our country's eternal independence, freedom, and ever more prosperous development. Only socialism can bring about the unification of our motherland at the highest and fullest degree in the fields of territory, political and moral life, economy, culture, society, as well as the fields of rights and duties, thereby fostering the solidarity and sincerity and deep mutual love between all members of society. There will be no forced idleness under post-liberated socialist construction in Africa and abroad. The work to build adequate infrastructure, that was Le Duan's quote. And now we're back to the political report to the plenary. There will be no forced idleness under post-liberated socialist construction in Africa and abroad. The work to build adequate infrastructure, housing, and schools, to electrify our cities and countryside, to grow food and purify water and eradicate disease and the deadly mosquito are just some of the tasks guaranteed to offer full employment for our people for years to come. This is productive labor that serves the people instead of bourgeois profit. This is productive labor that cannot happen under colonialist capitalism that grinds down and demoralizes the workers and humiliates the African colonial subject. Capitalist production functions on the base of stolen lands and peoples. It is production that only pays workers and toilers for their ability to produce, never for what we produce. The difference in the two is what capitalists refer to as surplus value or profit. The capitalist keeps this surplus for himself, though he never works or produces anything. The African worker state can only come into existence by the workers destroying the colonial base of capitalist production, replacing the oppressive state of the colonialist capitalist and transforming so-called surplus value into social wealth to provide for the well-being of society. This is how the African worker state will provide free healthcare, education, housing, childcare, etc. for the toiling masses, through expropriating the stolen resources from the colonialist capitalists, destroying the system of private ownership of social production, and creating a system of social ownership of social production. In a word, socialism, the early stage of communism. This is the new world we are fighting for in this party. It is not a world to be achieved through reforming police departments or improving police community relations within the US or anywhere else. It is not something that can be achieved by a $15 per hour minimum wage for workers in general over a period of years. We will have to make a revolution under the leadership of the advanced detachment of the African working class, guided by the advanced theory of African internationalism to initiate the world free from economic slavery and colonial oppression. This is why we must fight to put revolution on the political agenda for our people once again. Uhuru, Comrade Yeshitela.
Uhuru, Chairman. I wish we were live and in person with a bunch of people because that deserves thunderous applause. Uhuru, Chairman, that was incredible. And whew, the comment section's lighting up around it as well. I just really want to appreciate the study and introducing the second 7th Congress Plenary Political Report to this body. And we're so excited to review the rest of it. I mean, that was extremely profound. So we have about 15 minutes for any questions. And I haven't seen a lot come in, I think because people were just like on the edge of their seats, trying to listen to and, study the political report along with you. So if you guys do have any questions, go ahead and drop them into the comment section now. I thought I saw one come in through Facebook.
Where are people?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. I'm just thrown off. Thank you. So, yes, we want to acknowledge our viewers. We have St. Louis, Missouri, Chicago, Illinois, Oakland, California, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Toronto, Canada, Durham, North Carolina, Boston, Massachusetts, St. Petersburg, Florida, San Diego, California, Detroit, Michigan, Columbia, Missouri, Lakeland, Florida, Jamaica, Richmond, Virginia, Gulfport, Florida, Orlando, Florida, Huntsville, Alabama, Occupied Azania, South Africa, Kenya, Pinellas Park, Florida, Spokane, Washington, West Columbia, South Carolina, Fort Myers, Florida, Walkerville, Maryland, Tanzania, Newark, New Jersey, Dearborn, Michigan, Sacramento, California, Rockford, Illinois, Nigeria, Atlanta, Georgia, Germany, London, United Kingdom, Delaware County, Pennsylvania, Bermuda, Wichita, Kansas, Hempstead, New York, Houston, Texas, Deltona, Florida, and Brooklyn, New York. So, Uhuru. So everyone was tuned in from all of these places and most likely more if you just want to drop what location you're at in the comment section. So someone did ask a question, and I think that you talked about this in the political report extensively. So I don't if you want to go back to it or not, but this question came from a Michael T on Facebook, and his question was, what is your assessment of Antifa as a political tendency and movement, and what should be the relationship of African internationalism toward it? So you did just go through that, so I don't know if you want to touch it again.
Well, I mean, I think the quote from Cabral was very powerful in the sense that we don't like fascism, but we know that fascism rests upon the foundation of colonialism, and that we sympathize with the people who are making that struggle. But that's not our struggle. Our struggle is against colonialism, and we show our solidarity with the anti-fascist people by fighting for colonialism, against colonialism. And we would hope that the so-called anti-fascist Democrats would show solidarity by uniting under the leadership of the African Revolution to destroy the entire social system. Uhuru.
Uhuru, and again, that was from Michael T on Facebook. So let's see. Just looking for more questions. Yeah, we don't have many coming in, Chairman. I think people are just like blown away. So let's see. Someone named Poppy Mike said, well, I mean, you just went over this too, but he said we need to hear more about what kind of world African internationalists are fighting to create. And I mean, you just went over that last section in the political report. So, Chairman, I don't know if you want to just, I'm sorry. Okay. Jamie Simpson, Comrade Jamie Simpson asks, Uhuru, Chairman, can you elaborate on your statement that those who define rule? That's his question.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is that I think that's one of the statements that Huey P. Newton became famous for during the revolutionary period of the Black Panther Party, that political power, that real power is the ability to define reality and to have it make and act in a predetermined way, to define phenomena and to have it act in a predetermined way. And so those who have defined our reality for us, the ones who govern and who rule us, they have the power. They have the ability to do that. And that Africans have to reacquire our ability to be a self-defining and self-governing and self-ruling people. That's the way you thrust yourself back into history. The part of the revolution of African people, as Cabral had once said, is to thrust ourselves back into history. And we do that by self-definition. And so, you know, I hope that spoke somewhat to what Comrade Jamie was just mentioning. But we're open to, you know, whatever observations that he would make as well.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Comrade Jamie. So, yeah, Chairman, I was just going to say, I don't know if there was, you know, just anything else that you wanted to say. Or
the only thing I want to say is that I would add, because it is related to that. And I started with this discussion around these really important electoral campaigns that the party is waging in St. Louis. I cannot overstate that. For those of us who are really interested in having power, taking power, I'm not talking about some bourgeois electoral, defining, event. I'm saying that as a part of the anti-colonial struggle that we are fighting on. And what you can see, if you go through this political report, and which will expose to everybody the full breadth and depth of the African People's Socialist Party, how it functions around the world, then you recognize that what we are doing, ultimately, the objective, and we stated clearly, is to overturn our oppression, our existence, living under foreign and alien power. And so that's why we are there. We are there, and we have these courageous, man and woman who are running for office there, and we are running against all the big money. And there are billions of dollars that are being looted from the African community in the St. Louis area. And we are campaigning to transfer those resources and negate the power of a colonizer, to negate the power of those who exploit and oppress our people. And you can participate from where you are, because the ones who are controlling us and dominating us in St. Louis are not just local to St. Louis. I mean, these are, I don't have enough time to go through like the evidence and how this international capital reveals itself in our oppression in St. Louis, in our exploitation in St. Louis. But I'm saying this true, and that you can fight to end that. This party doesn't ask you to join in any kind of fake projects that never materialize or just fanciful things that people put out there without having some foundation that can't even be represented in the real world. This is it. We're giving you an opportunity, everybody. And of course, we expect the party and the people who are part of the Uhuru movement to do everything possible to support the candidacies of Comrades Herdosha Kalambai Bentham and Comrade T'Chawa Masimba. We can win this thing. And if we win this, it will have powerful implications for the struggle of our people everywhere. And it will encourage others to be able to take a stand, a genuine stand, instead of this mealy-mouthed kind of politic to get along with the status quo. So I just wanted to hand that off to you. And I know we don't have much time, but Uhuru.
Uhuru. Thank you, Chairman. So we did get one question from King on Facebook. And he asks, okay, well now questions are rolling in. All right, so he says, I heard, Chairman, always grateful for your analysis and insight. What is the party's position on China and the many quote unquote economic development endeavors happening in the continent?
I guess he means the economic development endeavors happening in the continent as a consequence of China's intervention there. China is the fastest growing economic intervention in all of China and all of Africa. Fastest growing economic activity. And that's a hell of a statement to make. And I'm not making an anti-China statement. I'm making an anti-petty bourgeois, anti-capitalist, anti-colonial statement, because it doesn't matter who the colonizer is. The fact is, if you have a situation where your economy is controlled by external forces for their own benefit, it happens at the expense of the colonized. And that's why the working class, under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, the advanced attachment, has to have power. And we have to take over all the power so we don't have the situation of these neo-colonial puppets. Because who would China work with in Africa except some neo-colonial puppet, some neo-colonial setup? And this is a part of the problem that we've been confronted with since the defeat of the revolution of the 1960s. Because even China, and which has what it calls the Communist Party leading it, it works with the neo-colonial powers there. It needs to be joining and supporting the African internationalist movement. If it genuinely is some kind of communist organization, it needs to join with the efforts being made to overturn neo-colonialism in Africa. That would mean they would support the African Socialist International. So the point is that Africa has to have its own power, and that should determine the relationship we have with anybody else in the whole world and with each other.
Thank you, Chairman. And that was again King on YouTube.
King, your name came up someplace yesterday in a meeting I was in, I think, King. I think you're the same person, but
Uhuru. All right, so Chairman, I'll take one last question. We did get a bunch of questions just at the end, so we'll have to take them in another study. But this last question, and I think you just kind of answered it even with the question around China, but this comes from Comrade Farrell behind enemy lines in South Carolina.
Comrade Farrell, good to hear from you.
And the comrade asks, Chairman, though I understand the need for solidarity among all oppressed people, why should we support the Arabs when they have been and still are a great enemy to our people? And they were the ones who started the slave trade itself. They even now enslave our people today in Libya in brutal fashion. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I don't think the Arabs enslave us. I do think that, because you can say the Africans enslave us too. I mean, that's one of the things that we hear all the time. The Africans did that. I think that there's a certain kind of social system that has come into existence. It's a world system. And yes, the truth of the matter is that the Arabs played a profound role in the trans-Saharan slave trade. And that is something that some people say softened up the ability of the Europeans to come in. But the fact is that we have a world economy. It's not Arab-based economy. It's not an Arab-dominated economy. In fact, this world economy is something that's killing and destroying Arabs throughout the world as well. So I'm saying that our primary contradictions, not to say that there are no contradictions that exist between Africans and Arabs, because one of the things that happened is that I've seen is a certain kind of imperial attitude that you can see coming from Arabs who did once play a real role in owning African people. But the US government is the force that is responsible for what happened in Libya. The US government did that. I mean, so you had the Arab Gaddafi, you had the Arab Ben Bella, who from the Algerian Revolution, you had the Arab Gamal Nasser, who united with Nkrumah to try to make a united African revolution, and who chastised Che Guevara, telling him that he couldn't be running around in Africa, trying to, be Tarzan. So, it's not the Arabs that did it. And there is that history that will be resolved. But the thing is that the world economy is a capitalist world economy. It is not centered among Arabs. And even though there's a reconfiguration happening with this world economy, it's pointing in direction, not in direction of Arabs. And so I think we'll make a huge mistake. And I see some people who I know work with the CIA who wanted to make the Arab contradiction, the fundamental contradiction in Africa, that overlooked neo-colonial puppets who wreaking havoc with our lives and transferring all of our resources, not only to Europe, but what resources that might be going to Arab countries and what have you, are facilitated in part by the neo-colonial setup, who are directly tied to what has been characterized as Western imperialism. Uhuru. Thank you, Pharaoh, for the question.
Uhuru, Chairman, and thank you so much for your answer. And I just want to say that we are at the end of time. And before I turn it over to you, Chairman, to give us any closing remarks, I wanted to just let people know that next Sunday, we will be in the day 2 of the plenary. So there won't be a live study next week. We will be live on Facebook and YouTube with the plenary. So I just want people to know that So Chairman, any closing words before we get into our announcements?
No, but you said we're almost out of time, and I thought you were projecting imperialism when you were saying that, but that's all right.
I was deciding to kill two birds with one stone. All right. Well, again, thank you so much, Chairman. I mean, that was just 2 chapters of a political report. So, I mean, we have so much to look forward to. And I just really want to salute you for, presenting this, putting it out into the world. And it has just already been such a, profound document. So thank you so much, Chairman, for this study, Uhuru. And again, because of time, we want you guys to know that if your question was not answered, that we will take them in the Q&A portion of the study that will happen 2 weeks from now. So don't worry, do not fret. We will address your question in our next Omali Taught Me Sunday study. So this study was brought to you by the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, Winning the War of Ideas. For your revolutionary worldwide, for your world of revolutionary news and analysis, visit theburningspear.com. For our revolutionary radio, dynamic shows, and music by Africans all around the world, tune into Black Power 96.3 FM, broadcasting out of St. Petersburg, Florida, and accessible via the Black Power 96 app for Apple and Android, or online at blackpower96.org. The theory of African internationalism is a theory of practice. All the energy of the African People's Socialist Party is focused on the destruction of colonial capitalism. Africans of the world, unite and organize. Visit our website, apspuhuru.org, and fill out our contact form. And order your copy of Chairman Omali Yeshitela's latest book, Vanguard, The Advanced Attachment of the African Revolution, at burningspearmarketplace.com. So the African, as I mentioned earlier, we talked about it all throughout the study, but the African People's Socialist Party is inviting you to our second 7th Congress Plenary, February 6th through the 9th. That's just next weekend. It's going to be virtual and it's themed African workers of the world, unite and organize. So register today at apspplenary.org. And we're going to go ahead and run this video one more time. We showed it at the beginning, but we'll go ahead and run it again for those who missed it, our plenary promo video. True.
We are a nation of people that's been dispersed against our will. We must be organized. There are material objectives that we have as a people.
We can't settle!
We demand reparations. We are one people, we are one Africa, we are Africans. We were Africans when we got on the ship, we are Africans when we got off the ship.
Black power matters!
We have to recognize that America is a settler colony. The police are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. All over the world, you see people rising up. The people must have power. Because we are Africans. Our power to the people, black power to the African community. They thought they had destroyed the movement, but we are here to tell them that black is back. Black is back. Capitalism must be destroyed. Colonialism must be destroyed. The people must have power.
So y'all not trying to miss that. You hear the political report, you're going to be able to receive the full digital version when you register for the plenary. That's going to be so dope. So go ahead, join us next weekend because it's going to be dynamic. We are calling on people to follow the All African Peoples Development and Empowerment Project on Facebook or visit developmentforafrica.org for important information and helpful tips in regards to the colonial virus COVID-19. APDEP has recently launched an international telehealth program, a free resource for African people to get our COVID-19 related questions and concerns answered by licensed doctors and nurses through Project Black Ankh. You can make your free virtual appointment with one of their professional health providers by going to developmentforafrica.org/telehealth. And if you're looking for more opportunities of live political education from Chairman Omali Yeshitela, tune in every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern on the Chairman Omali Yeshitela's Facebook like page and Burning Spear TV YouTube page with Chairman's address to the African nation, discussing important topical issues and providing us with an African internationalist analysis. And lastly, to keep up with our movement events, visit the burningspear.com's events page and subscribe to our mailing list. You also get notices of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Studies when you subscribe to that list. So thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. Uhuru.